In this video, we're going to discuss how to construct a relative frequency histogram. So in the previous video, we did the exact same data and we constructed a frequency histogram. Okay, so using the frequency column, we constructed a histogram. This is what it looked like. Okay, so frequency was on the y-axis. So now we're going to change it up by constructing a relative frequency histogram. Okay, so first thing we're going to need to do is calculate this column over here. It's called relative frequency. Right. So let's see, what is relative frequency? Relative frequency is the frequency relative to the total sample size. Right. So this is this data. It's the ages of 50 randomly selected children in after-school daycare. Okay, so the total sample size is 50. And so what is the frequency of 14 relative to the total, right? So we'll go ahead and pull out a calculator. The way you'll calculate this, actually, let me go ahead and clear this out. So the way you'll calculate this is you'll take 14 and you'll divide that by 50, right? So 0.28 of the observations are coming from the first class. Now usually relative frequency is reported as a percentage, so you can take that and multiply it by 100 to get the percentage. Okay, so 28%. Okay, so I'll go ahead and take that, and this will be 28%. Right. Next, for the class that has 12 observations, so we'll take 12 and we'll divide that by 50, and then we'll go ahead and multiply that by 100, and we get 24%. Okay, so 24% of the observations are in the second class. Right. And then we'll have 10. Divide that by 50, multiply that by 100 to get a percentage, 20%. Okay, so 20% of the observations are in the third class. Okay, then 9 divided by 50 times 100, 18% of the observations are in the fourth class. And then lastly, 5 divided by 50 times 100 to make it a percentage, 10% are in the last class. All right. Okay, so now we're ready to go ahead and construct our relative frequency histogram. It's going to be very similar to the frequency histogram. Okay, so this was the frequency histogram. It's going to be very similar to that. I'll go ahead and draw it right underneath of it, actually. So I'll go ahead and draw the x and y axis. Now instead of it being frequency over here on the y axis, now it's going to be relative frequency. Okay, and our percentages for our range of percentages for our relative frequency go from, let's see, all the way up to about 30%. All right, so from 10 to 30. So I'll go ahead and count by tens. So here will be 10%, 20%, and 30%. Okay, so down here is 0%, right? And then the x-axis is going to be exactly the same as it was in the frequency histogram. This is going to be the age of the children in daycare or after school care. Okay. All right, and just like how we in the frequency histogram, we could use either the class boundaries or the class midpoints for the x-axis. The same is true for the relative frequency histogram. We can either use the class boundaries or the class midpoints. I'm a fan of using boundaries. So I'm going to go ahead and use boundaries for this histogram. Okay, it's kind of unless it's specified in the problem which you should use, either class boundaries or class midpoints. It's kind of a personal preference to some extent. All right, so I'll go ahead and start labeling these guys. This one would be 0.5 to, let's see, what did it go to? 2.5 to 2.5, then to 4.5, 6.5, 8.5, 10.5. Let me just double check all those. Yep. Okay. All right. So now let's just go to the relative frequency in our charts. Let's go to the relative frequency and then start recording each of these bars. So the first one is 28%, then 24, then 20. Okay, so let's go ahead and draw some of those bars. Okay, so the first bar is 28%. So it'll be somewhere around right here. Okay, it's a good habit to go ahead and write on the top what percentage you went to. So 28, then the next one was 24. Okay, so we'll go ahead and label that 24%. And the next one was 20%. So that'll be right here. 20%, then 18%. Let's go ahead and look up what the last one was. Last class is 10%. Okay. 10%. All right. So now if we look at this, look at the relative frequency histogram, compare it to the frequency histogram, you see their shape is actually, it's exactly the same. It should be exactly the same if my bars were, more straight and everything. They should be exactly the same shape. Okay. The only difference is now we have relative frequency instead of just plain frequency. So before, if you were asked a question like, how many children are more than 6.5 years old that attend daycare? Well, 6.5 is right here, right? So 6.5 is right here. And so you would answer that question using the frequency, frequency histogram. How many children are more than 6.5 years? You'd say, oh, well, 9 plus 5, so it's 14 children, right? Versus if you were to use the relative frequency histogram, then you would say, okay, well, I can tell you the percentage of children that are more than 6.5 years. So that'd be 18 plus 10. So that'd be 28% of the children that go to daycare are more than 6.5 years old, right? So it's just a slightly different way of displaying the data, but they're displaying basically the same stuff. It's just a slightly different way of displaying the information. And just one more thing I wanted to add. If you were to add up all of these percentages for the relative frequency, they should add up to 100%, right? You should have had 100% of your data included, and so therefore 100% should be the sum of all the relative frequencies. So when you're calculating the relative frequencies in the table, it's a good practice to go ahead and take the sum and make sure that it totals up to 100%. So 28 plus 24 plus 20 plus 18 plus 10 should equal 100. And if it doesn't, that's a sign that maybe, you made a mistake in your calculations. So the total is 100%. It's a good practice to always sum that up, just like how it's a good practice to sum up the frequency column to make sure that your total sample size is the total of the frequency column.